Broadcast Center on GoLocal Live. I'd like to start out by saying hello and welcoming our first guest. Karen Crouse is an author and she's an award-winning sports writer for the New York Times. Karen, thank you so much for joining us via Skype today.
It is my pleasure. I appreciate you having me on.
So I'm very excited to be speaking with you today about your first book. It is Norwich, One Tiny Vermont's Town, Secret to Happiness and Excellence. It's published by Simon & Schuster, so we're very happy to be speaking with you about this today. You returned back stateside not too long ago after covering the Winter Olympic Games in Pyeongchang as well, and you released this book just before the Winter Games. And you went to Norwich to find out the secret to this town's success. There are only about 3,000 residents living in this small Vermont town, Norwich, but somehow they seem to mass produce elite athletes, sending an athlete, a participant to the Winter Games, nearly at least one for the past 30 years. Can you talk to us about how you came about this town and this story?
Well, I have to profess that they did not have an Olympian at this game. So they have now had one U.S. Olympian at every games but two in the winter. So it's still a remarkable achievement for a town that's so small. And that's what drew me to it originally. Like, how did this town become such an unlikely Olympic pipeline? But what I found once I got there, Molly, was so heartening because this is a place that does not set out to create or develop Olympians. It's almost as if they develop these Olympians by accident. What they look at when they introduce their children to a wide array of sports is all the intrinsic benefits that you can get from sports, the life lessons, the lifelong friendships. And it's almost as if the relationship building is more important than the championship building. The championships come almost as icing on the cake for what the town is really trying to achieve through sports. And I was really heartened by that because I was an athlete through college, never made an Olympic team, never made a national team, was a walk-on, so I didn't even earn a college scholarship. And so in the zero-sum game that sports have become, even at the youth level in our society, you would look at the arc of my career and say, wow, what a failure she was. And I could not disagree more vehemently. I just am so thankful for all the intrinsic benefits I got from sports. And I've wondered, is that being lost? And in Norwich, I found a town that's still really hews to those values, but also manages to achieve a level of excellence that frankly is mind-boggling.
This is, I mean, it's an iconic story. It's a fascinating story. And what's interesting is I'm curious if this is the story that you initially set out to do in the first place,
No.
or if you just kind of stumbled upon the youth sports and the youth culture and really more about the town. If this is what you set out to do, or if it just turned into something else.
It turned into something bigger and so much
Yeah.
more beautiful than I set out to do because I I've covered sports for 30 years as a journalist, and I've seen over that time just an increasing emphasis put on the results and the bottom line and the idea that second place is the first loser. And because of my background, I just did not feel in sync with that movement at all. And I've really been a bit disillusioned by it because there's so many benefits to sports. And if you project that only the winners gain anything, well, what is really the broader purpose for competing or participating in sports at all? So in this town, I found all of my own value systems reflected. But not only that, I thought I was writing a sports story. That's what I set out to do. And what I realized really early on is that I was really writing a parenting guide masquerading as an Olympic story.
Absolutely fascinating, and it's beautifully done as well. So, congratulations to you on your first book.
Thank you.
Let's talk a little bit about how you went about writing the story itself. You didn't just do a few interviews here and there, you actually embedded yourself within the town of Norwich. Talk to us about how you went about writing the story.
So imagine I arrive in Norwich, in Vermont, a state I had never before set foot in, and all the local populace knows of me is that I grew up in California and am now a city slicker from the New York Times. I knew that I was not going to inspire confidence with that resume. So I moved to Vermont for 5 months and just embedded myself, as you said, in the community so that people could get to know me and my story. There, every day that I was there, I probably met with at least 5 people, and not just to say hello, but I would really pick their brains and grill them. How did you wind up here? What do you like about the town? What does it have that other places you've lived lack or doesn't have? And so I really got a greater sense of the town through all these conversations. But just as importantly, the townspeople got to know me a little better, and that enabled them to feel more comfortable telling their stories to me. But it was funny, Molly, because maybe 2 of the most popular Olympians are the ski jumpers, Mike Holland and Jeff Hastings, just because they've left such a huge footprint on the community. Not only were they arguably the 2 best ski jumpers the United States has ever produced, but they also have continued throughout the years to teach ski jumping to generations of kids. They are very active with the local high school ski jumping team. So they are really well known and highly regarded and beloved in the community. And yet, when I sat down with each of them separately, they looked at me quizzically when I said I wanted to write a book about their exploits and the success of the town. And each of them, without knowing what the other had told me, said, well, I'm happy to help you with this book, but I don't think you're going to get more than 1 or 2 pages on my story. They just don't see themselves as a big deal. And to me, that was part of the reason for the success of this town is that instead of holding the elite performers up above everyone else, but putting them on a pedestal, these people are completely integrated into the community. They see themselves as no better, no worse than anyone else. They look at themselves as ordinary people who, for a few years in their lives, were part of an extraordinary journey.
It's absolutely fascinating, and like you said, really becoming a part of that community and communal in a way.
Yeah.
And this town, Karen, seems to have become a pipeline for Olympic athletes and successful ones, but not maybe the way, like you've said, our obsessive sports culture could have imagined. Can you talk about some of the keys that this town has produced for continued success?
Sure. Well, volunteerism is at the root of everything. That there's this feeling in the town, and it's unspoken. It's almost as if it's passed on from generation to generation through osmosis, that every person has some resource, whether it's time, expertise, money, that they can pass on to others. So there's the sense that not only is it something that you should do, but you should not think twice about in your day-to-day life, in some way reaching out to make someone else's life brighter, better. It can be something as easy as many of the grown-ups will go to the local public grade school and read at lunch to the kids as they eat their lunches. Or it can be something grander, paying for kids their rec league fees so that they can participate in these no-cut sports. And that's a big part of it too. They do not cut in any of their leagues. But there's just this sense that we're all in this together, that my child does not have to succeed at the expense of your child, that everyone is better when people are working together and all pulling in the same direction. And I found that really heartening. It also reminded me of my childhood in Santa Clara in the 1970s. Now, if you look at Norwich and Santa Clara now, the two cities appear to have little in common, but when I was growing up in Santa Clara, it was still largely agrarian. There were orchards still all over, and it was considered America's fruit basket. And so there was this sense that a communitarian spirit that I think the Silicon Valley revolution has all but squashed. You know, they're all about disrupting, getting in fast, getting what you want, and moving on. And I think what defines Norwich is this sense that no, we're really all in this together. And so, all for one, one for all. I am going to root for your child as much as I root for my child, because it's really just about the journey and the relationships and not so much about the results. And I think that because of the way these kids are raised, because they are very much a part of the community along every step of the way, the community is there to pick them up when they fall or fail. There's this large social safety net that helps the kids while they're competing, but then allows them to integrate more easily and fully back into the community when their sports careers are over. And that's the piece of it, Molly, that I so often see going missing with a lot of the high level athletes that I cover, that in their quest to be the best, to win these gold medals and set these world records, they're almost isolated from the community that they are very much of but not in. And as a result, once they're done, they really don't have that social safety net to welcome them back and to pick them up as they try to figure out what their next act is, to embrace them as they contemplate their futures.
I think that's so critical. The way that you compare that is that these people, as they work their way through in Norwich, being celebrated, being embraced, being part of the community, not being elevated one way or another, and when they go to compete and then they're embraced back within the community and have those social skills, whereas in other places in the country they really don't have those social skills to be integrated back within the community, and we oftentimes see elite athletes struggle. They burn out,
Right.
they crash and burn, whether that's an elite athlete in any other sport or they're in a major league, or they oftentimes you see tragic stories where they just people don't have the skills because they weren't set up for success later on in life because they only had this elite sport to compete in. Those were the only skills they were taught. So it's fascinating to see you tell that and weave that into the story as well. So,
Yes, and I think you bring up a good point, is that if you are only seen as an athlete, if you are only
mm-hmm.
feted or celebrated as the sum total of your successes,
Yeah.
that's what your identity becomes. You see yourself as an athlete. I compete, I win, therefore I am. So, what happens when that competition piece is taken away? The athlete loses his or her self identity. And that's where the anxiety, depression, and problems really begin.
Which is devastating. Uh, do you think that this I mean it's not really a concept, it is
Mm,
happening. So I
yeah.
I don't necessarily want to say concept, but we'll just use that terminology. Do you think the Norwich way of life, not necessarily concept, but do you think the Norwich way can thrive and can happen in any community here in America? And if so, how do we make that happen?
Well, I think it requires a subtle shift in our value system, away from really valuing the end results and instead looking at sports as, yes, there are benefits to be gained, some extrinsic benefits, college scholarships, Olympic berths, maybe even a pro careers. But more importantly, there are life lessons that can be learned through sports. self-discipline, delayed gratification, resilience, perseverance, being coachable, being a team person. These are all valuable qualities that you can take with you into the real world that can be learned through sports. Lifelong friendships, just really taking the emphasis on the end results and putting it back on having fun, enjoying the process, mastering skills, self-improvement, relationship building. So that's the first thing. I was kind of chuckling because I went to the Olympics in Pyeongchang, and of course, the nation that just dominated those games was Norway with 59 medals. Well, Norway, Molly, is the Norwich of countries. They really value with their youngsters just introducing sports, putting them all in the same age. They train alongside kids the same age, regardless of the talent level. And their idea is, their philosophy is, we don't even want to publicize results of kids that are 10, 12, 8. You will never see a story published in Norway on the best 10-year-old alpine skier. Their philosophy is, let's make the sport fun in the beginning, get the kids hooked on the activity, allow them to develop some mastery, and then when they become teens, if they want to become serious, fine. They want the children's best years to come between the years of 17 and 27, whereas we have a model right now in our society at large where the model is from 7 to 17, and a lot of kids don't even make it to 17 because they're so burned out. And so I think we just need to shift the philosophy a little. It takes coaches and parents that are willing to do that and be on the same page. I think the kids, if left to their own devices, this is where they would gravitate. If you watch kids who start pickup games, they will actually, and there have been studies done to verify this or corroborate this, they will actually bend the rules so that the game can continue longer. They're not as attuned to the results until they get that kind of feedback from the parents in their midst.
Exactly, a little rule bending. Always lots of be fun to be had in those pickup games, and again, crucial skills that you can learn from playing sports: leadership, team building, humbleness.
Exactly. Humility, absolutely.
Exactly. So always wonderful lessons to be learned, whether win or loss. I think there's a lot to be learned from losing as well.
Yeah.
Karen Crouse, I want to say thank you. Before we let you go, you have been following and continue to storytell on Tiger Woods' run at the Masters, and something to be said about the Norwich Way of life and Tiger Woods. I want to ask you what it's been like to write about Tiger Woods coming back and making that run at the Masters with the Norwich Way of life in mind, maybe.
Right. Well, he was definitely not raised the way they are in Norwich. And I was reminded of that. I read a fabulous book that's just coming out this week on Tiger, called Tiger Woods, by Armin Kettian and Jeff Benedict. And they have this telling anecdote. They talked to his kindergarten teacher who remembered that Tiger approached her and said, "Could you ask my dad if I could play soccer?" And here was the deal. Tiger's dad, Earl, would not let him do any other sports.
Wow.
He was to play golf because Earl had this grandiose vision for his son that Tiger amazingly has been able to fulfill, but there was a price to be paid along the way. And what I found gratifying about watching Tiger so far this year, and of course it's quite early in his comeback still, but he really seems to be appreciating the sport for just the small things, for just being able to pull off a great shot. He's interacting more with the fans. He just appears to be enjoying the process and the journey, whereas for decades and decades, he was solely focused on the results. I remember ex-wife, Elin, when they were still married, a story where after a victory, she asked, well, should I plan a party? And he said, no, Elin, this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
Wow.
And so it's that singularly focused, just, almost obsession with the results that I think really hurt him, his overall development as a person. And so I'm really happy to see him back out here and see fans really celebrating him. And I hope that he is able to continue to enjoy it. I was really glad to hear him say a couple weeks ago that, hey, I'm not looking to win. From where I came in October, I'm happy just to be out here. And I think if he can maintain that attitude, it will serve him really well. And the results will probably end up coming as just as a matter of course. But I think he'll be a happier human being along the way.
Most definitely. Well, Karen Crouse, award-winning sports writer with the New York Times. Her book is Norwich, One Tiny Vermont's Town, Secret to Happiness and Excellent. Karen, it's been so wonderful speaking with you today. What a true pleasure. If you get a chance, follow Karen on Twitter, read her work, and go out and pick up a copy of the book. Karen, I do appreciate it. A little bit of a sports book, but like you said, kind of a parenting guide as well.
And a real antidote to all of the stuff that's dividing our country at the moment.
If you do say so. I'd like to thank Karen Crouse for joining us here on GoLocal Live. We're going to take a quick pause to get set up for our next guest. Hang with us.